Hello and welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast, hosted by Daryl Dittmer, where we talk about the fight or fights that so many of us engage in this lifetime, as well as ways to potentially relieve ourselves of those fights. Let's get started. Welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast, where we talk about the fight or fights that so many of us engage in this lifetime, as well as strategies to slow or stop those fights. My name is Daryl Dittmer. Today I'm joined by Charles LeVoir, creator, host, and producer of the Way Out podcast, as well as a recovery coach professional and long-term sober human. So happy to have you on, Charles. Welcome.
Daryl, thank you, brother, for having me on. It's an honor.
Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your support. I like to start by asking my guests how they got to where they are today. There's always a good story that drives a person to either change or help others or move in a different direction or start a podcast. I'd love to know what that story is for you, sir.
It's a great question, Daryl. And my story starts pretty early on for me. My mom died when I was 11 years old, and that's a big part of my story. But even prior to that, as my dad is often guilty of saying out loud, Charlie had the quickest hand to the cookie jar ever since I could remember. And it's funny because I was at lunch with my dad a few weeks back, and I told him, I say that in my story, Dad, that you always say that I had the quickest hand to the cookie jar. And he's like, no, seriously, it's true. You did. That's God's honest truth. He's like, we would hide that thing, okay, way, way, way up high. And your 2-year-old little butt in diapers would be climbing and scaling refrigerators to get to the cookies. And so I believe fundamentally I always had big addict and alcoholic switches, and they were bound to get tripped at some point. And then my mom dying when I was 11 years old from cancer was definitely kerosene on an already burning campfire of addiction. And when I was 15, I drank for real for the first time, and it was magical. It unlocked things in me that prior to that moment, I was not able to unlock. I could flirt with the girls. I could stick up to the guys. I was the life of the party. I liked who I was when I was drinking. And it eliminated all of the icky stuff. The pain, the anxiety, the insecurity that I dealt with as long as I could remember, really. So all I wanted to do was do that again. And that first fateful night where I experienced that magical feeling, I got so drunk that I was wild and out of control, and the people at the party put me in an outdoor dog kennel to contain me because they couldn't figure out another way to keep me away from the alcohol that I had already way too much of. And they went and checked on me a couple hours later, and I wasn't breathing, and my lips were blue, and my best friend, still to this day, was able to revive me somehow by pounding on my chest, and then they proceeded to feed me an entire bottle of syrup of Ipecac, and I threw up for like 3 hours in that dude's garage. And despite all of that, all I wanted to do was drink again as soon as I possibly could. because I loved that feeling. It was the only thing that took it away. It's the only thing that made me feel okay, even if it was just for a little while. So I was willing to put up with whatever. Like, I had this thought after I used and drank, if you were me, you would drink too.
Mm.
If you were me, if you knew what it was like to be me, you would use too. So you don't know what it's like to be me. Right? You don't know what it's like to live in my own body. You would do this too if you were me. And I did. I did it a lot. And I went to treatment when I was 16, forced by my dad and my stepmom. And real quick, I figured out the game, like what to say in order to be able to get out of there as soon as I possibly could. I lied my way into outpatient because I was terrified of inpatient. And at 28 days at this adolescent treatment center, all of my treatment buddies were like, man, you're going to stay sober forever. If I just had a shred of your wisdom. And Eileen, the head treatment counselor, usurps the circle. I didn't even think this lady was listening the whole time I was there. Takes the coin, looks at me straight in the eyes, really straight in my soul. Says, you're lying to yourself. You're lying to this group. You're going to use again, and it's probably going to kill you. And she walked out. And
Wow.
God's honest truth.
Big moment.
Big moment, Daryl. Big moment. Every time my addiction, my alcoholism became unmanageable, Eileen would come into my consciousness. Whether that be an external consequence like a DWI, or a failed marriage, or whether that be an internal consequence where there was a realization that my behavior was so far from who I deep down knew at one time I could be. She would come into my consciousness. You're lying to yourself. You're lying to this group you're going to use again, and it's probably going to kill you. I got a nudge from the judge again when I was in my early 20s, stayed sober for about a year on wall steps and fellowship. And met a gal, had a kid right away, and was too busy for recovery. Plus, it was a phase, and I'm not really like you people. I'm glad you people have this, by the way. You need it. You need it. But I'm good. I've got this thing figured out. I've learned my lesson. I'm good. And really for the next 15 years was characterized by two increasingly unavoidable truths. Over any length of time, my drinking or my substance use will become unmanageable. Again, through some sort of internal or external consequence. Also, over any length of time, not drinking and not using becomes unmanageable. I can't stay sober by myself. I can't do it. I'll become increasingly restless, irritable, and discontent, and feel like I have no solution but to drink or use. On the back end of a third marriage that I'm burning down, she looks at me one day and she says, Charlie, you drink every day. I'm like, yeah, but baby, it's only a few. Problem with this only a few lie is it's hard to outsmart somebody that's A, already smarter than you, and B, not drunk. She figured out it was way more than a few in like 2 days. Even though I was doing some sort of like weird like fridge garage beer rotation program, Daryl, that I mean, again, it took her like a day and a half to figure it out. She's like, you're drinking way more than a few, Charlie. Like, it's not a problem. She's like, I think you have a problem. It's not a problem. I can quit anytime I want. She's like, sweet, do it. Like, I should have seen that coming. And so I quit for 30 days on Marlboros and Resentments, which I don't recommend, and convinced her that it was okay to get alcohol for my eldest son's birthday. And Thanksgiving fell on the same day, and we were having my parents over, and I said, should get some alcohol. She's like, okay, I'll get it. I got it. I'll get it. I got enough alcohol to get an army drunk, and there was 4 of us drinking. And I never liked to put myself in this box where I committed to myself or anybody else that I was only going to drink X amount, because I knew myself just well enough to know that once I started, I can't predict when I'm going to stop with any sort of reliability. But I knew how much was riding on this. Like, I needed to demonstrate that I'm not an alcoholic. So parents come over. I start drinking. I can't stop. I'm having an out-of-body experience where every fiber of my being wants to stop, and I can't. I know how much is riding on this. I can't stop. I'm drinking half-drank wine. That's not mine. I make a complete fool out of myself carving the turkey and almost carve my hand off in the process. My parents leave. She looks at me. She wasn't trying to be mean. And said, "What is wrong with you?" My eldest looks at her and looks at me and says, "What do you mean?" It's just Dad. He's just drunk again. And at that moment, I understood really for the first time I wasn't fooling anybody about my relationship with alcohol. She's like, "You got to go to treatment or it's over." And so I went to treatment, just trying not to get divorced, really. Like, I didn't have any designs on getting sober. I just didn't want to burn down a third marriage. And I got to that treatment counselor's office, and this is one of those acts of providence. And for the first time, I got completely honest with another human being about the nature and scope of my substance and alcohol use and abuse. And it all came crashing down at that moment. It became impossible at that moment for me to deny that I'm an alcoholic and an addict, and I needed help because I couldn't do it on my own. I tried many times. Can't do it on my own. And I had a recognition that everything up to that moment, the failed marriages, the DWIs, I was the constant there. I was the problem. And I needed to get better. And I just had this profound surrender followed by a willingness to do whatever it took to get better. And if that meant not drinking and using, then I was willing to do that. And that was the beginning.
Wow. That is powerful, Charles. Just a powerful story. And I had my Eileen in my life. And I think I mentioned that story last time we spoke, but and his name was, we'll call him Ron. And he was the guy that I sat down with, and the first, drug and alcohol counselor that I sat down with. And I was just a kid, and I walked into his office, and it was a similar moment of holy crap for me, like somebody looking into my soul. But he said, "You can't lie to me. You can't BS me. Don't even try. Let's just sit down and have this conversation. And it was, similar to, I think, what you had experienced. Just, that door creaked open, and I was as honest with him as I could be at that time. And for whatever reason, I don't understand exactly why. But that's what happened. And enough light shone, I think, to at least get me to go into treatment. And then after that, I decided I wanted a different life. But the kicking and screaming is amazing, isn't it? The kicking and screaming is absolutely amazing. And I will just say, sober or not, mostly not sober, but even sober, sometimes the kicking and screaming is tough. Yeah?
No question. One of the things I work on the most still today is letting go and surrender. And we talked a little bit about it before hitting the old record button. But it's a process with my higher power. And when I started working the 12 steps in order with a sponsor, this is when I really started understanding how much I was getting in my own way and how much fighting my own alcoholism and addiction by denying it, and that first surrender moment coming into treatment and finally stop fighting, stop pretending, stop denying the truth, and accept and surrender that I have a problem and I need help. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get better. And you talk about your treatment experience, Daryl. I always say any reason is a good reason to get into recovery.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, it's the entirety of life for me since I got sober has been, how do I slow down and or stop the fight? And I was originally introduced to that topic, and it was my sponsor. And I love that you mentioned sponsor in 12 steps, because that was the route that I took to getting my head out of my rear end. And, to the extent that I did at any given time. And my sponsor at one point said to me, as I grew up with my Protestant work ethic and my, you're not hurt unless you're bleeding out, and, no pain, no gain, get up, walk it off, all that sort of stuff. And so I was wrestling with something, and I went to my sponsor and I just said, I'm out of my mind. I can't do this. And, yada, whatever. And the sponsor was like, Daryl, when you stop fighting, the fighting stops. What? What are you talking about? How could this possibly be true? And I was 8 months sober at that time. So I got it to the extent that I could at that time, which was, okay, maybe there's a possibility that I'm the problem. But, and convincing myself of that ever since. Can you relate to that sort of progression in terms of, the fight and how it,
yes,
it starts huge, right? And then, little by little, we chip away.
No question, Daryl. And for me, there's been levels of surrender. I can only do the best I could do at a given time. So I work the 12 steps in order with a sponsor to the best of my ability. And some really profound shifts occurred when I did that work. And the first shift really happened prior to starting that work with a sponsor, in my surrender and full honesty about the true nature, scale, and scope of my addiction and alcoholism. That was that first surrender. And it felt so relieving and terrifying at the same time. But it felt mostly just so good to stop running from it. I'd been running from it for 20 years. And so at age 36, to accept this fundamental truth about myself that I had been running from for so long was a huge burden lifted. And then starting to work the steps. After that step one, which is really about being honest with myself about my relationship with alcohol and substances and about how they've manifested in my life, it's about a higher power next. And I didn't know it. I thought I was agnostic. I told people for years I was agnostic. Turns out I had a big fat resentment against God.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know that, Daryl, until I started working the 12 steps. And so I had a dilemma. I needed to get a higher power, but I hated the one that I knew. And so I just wiped the slate completely clean. Like, some people used a higher power that, or a God of their understanding that they already had. Some people create one in the 12 steps, one that matches what they think a higher power should be, and that works for some people, and that's great. For me, if I could think it up, it wasn't big enough for me.
Mm.
And so I just started praying to a God I didn't understand, that I had no concept of, but I meant it. And it was real simple. Morning, I'd just get on my knees and I would ask for help. Help me stay sober. Help me do the next right thing. Those are the two things I asked, and I meant it. And at night, I'd get on my knees and I'd thank this higher power for another day sober. That's it. That second shift happened after doing that for a while. And I realized praying to a God that I didn't understand, that I had no concept of, was changing me in a really profound way, in a way that I had not been able to manage to change before. What I was putting out into the world was fundamentally changing. And so what I was getting back was changing. And that was a big spiritual awakening for me. And I started to develop a relationship with a God of my understanding. And that relationship continues to this day. It ebbed and flowed over the years. I'm 9 years sober today. There were times where it was not as connected, and there was times that was a little bit more. And recently, after ending a long-term relationship in sobriety, my first long-term relationship in sobriety, one that I come out of grateful for a lot of reasons. I learned a lot about myself. I didn't leave claw marks on that relationship or her. I don't have any amends to make. Right? And that's growth. That's progress. And to walk away from a relationship that ultimately ends, but I don't feel like I harmed that person, that's only because of recovery. That's only because of sobriety. And and the ability, Daryl, not to fight and claw and say, no, we got to try to make something that's not going to work. And if you're not going to do it, then I'm going to fight. I didn't fight. I let it go because I had just enough of a relationship with a higher power to be able to lean into that higher power when I really needed God. And I did. And after that relationship ended, I meant it. Again, really simple. You take it all. I'm out. Whatever you want, God, I'm out. And I mean it. You take my work, you take my personal life, you take my love life, you take all of it. If I'm supposed to be single for the rest of my life, I'm in. And I meant it. If I'm supposed to be with somebody, okay. Show me who that person is. If I'm supposed to do what I'm doing for work, I'm in. I'll do it. If I'm supposed to do something else, show me and I'll do that too. And that's this new level of surrender that I'm experiencing. A surrender that I didn't really even know was possible, right? And this is a part of our growth and a part of the evolution. And I really believe, we're ready when we're ready, and we can only do as much as we can at a given time, and that's how this process works.
It takes what it takes, right? It takes what it takes. That's my relationship with God, as I like to say, not as I understand him, as I fail to understand him. It was very similar. It was very similar growing up with that Protestant work ethic and that Protestant thing. And here's your box of stuff that you have to believe, right? Here's the stuff you're required to believe. And if you don't believe it, it's going to hit the fan and you're going to go to a very bad place forever and ever. And that didn't resonate with me. It didn't resonate with me when I was younger, and it didn't resonate with me getting sober. So I had to, you said you just kind of replaced everything, right? You just dropped that old stuff. And I did the same thing. I had to, but I laid everything out on a table. That's kind of how I perceive it. I laid it out on a table. I looked at it. Here's my beliefs. Here's where I'm at. And I'm picking up the stuff that I think is going to work or might work, and leaving the stuff that hadn't worked. And what hadn't worked was, the religious upbringing that I was given. And religion works for some folks, and that's wonderful. It just wasn't my path, and that's okay. I'm completely cool with that, and I'm happy about that, because the God that's defined by that is, I like to have a God that I don't need to define.
You got it.
And when I looked at it as in the beginning, and it's morphed over time, just like you said, it changes over time. But the original sort of iteration was, okay, look, I'm not the one who makes my eyes see, and I'm not the one who makes the grass grow, and I'm not the one who makes the planets move around each other. And I'm not that cool. I mean, I'm, that's some pretty cool stuff somebody's doing. It's not me, right? There's
100%, Daryl.
Something a lot bigger, right? So
I love
anyway.
that. It reminds me of the old 12-step saying that the only two things we need to know about a higher power or God is that there is one and I'm not it.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And
that's a good place to start.
That is absolutely, it's a great place to start. And I, that was really where it sounds like we both started, right? It was just 100%. Something else. Something else other than me can be in charge.
Okay? That's the rule. There is one and it can't be you. So, all right, cool. I'll start praying and see what happens. And that's been my experience around spiritual actions, is there's a physics that occurs when I take spiritual actions. I don't even have to believe in it at all. I don't have to trust it. I just have to do it. And when I perform a spiritual action, physics takes over. And my life changes and things change inside of me. And then it starts to inform a belief around that I can trust because I experience it.
Right. That's it. I mean, the proof's in the pudding, right? It's how have I or we gone from where we were to where we are without there being something out there helping us along. Before we hit record, we talked about opportunity and how opportunity shows up. And it's not even necessarily that opportunity shows up. I'm going to rephrase that I'm able to see opportunity when it shows up if I get myself out of the way.
That's it. If I can be aware, spiritually aware, and then I'm going to see those opportunities, whether that's opportunities to be of service and help you, a brother and sister in or out of recovery, whether that's an opportunity to be able to do something in my work life, in my personal life. And at the center of that is getting out of my own way, letting go, and in communication with my higher power, what's the next right thing that's going to do the most good here? Right? How am I able to be of most service in this situation? And a lot of times it's by doing nothing, by getting, I don't need to intervene, right? Like, I don't need to get involved. My opinion's not required. I don't need to manage it. I don't need to micromanage it. Right? So get out of the way and show up in love and show up as the best example of recovery I can be. And only because of my relationship with the God of my understanding and great mentors in recovery have I learned that always the best thing to do is be the best example of recovery I can be on a given day, given moment, given situation. Worry about the hula hoop theory, right? If you put a hula hoop around you, like everything inside of that hula hoop is what I can control.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So worry about how I'm responding or not responding and doing my level best to act according to the person that I'm trying to be today.
I love that. I do. I inside the I never heard the hula hoop theory before, but that's true. We always referred to it as, from the skin in. That's what I can control. And same theory. But if you look outside your skin, there's a lot out there. There's a lot out there that I cannot do a damn thing about. It's amazing. And quick little story as we head toward winding down here a little bit, but you brought up a memory for me of an old timer back in the day. His name was Stan Z, and this was a long time ago, but he used to say, and I was a kid, 19, 20 years old, and he used to say, the purpose of sobriety is so that you can become a useful member of society. I'm like, Well, that's really boring. Isn't there anything else? Is that it? Like, seriously? But it's true. It really is true. And my sponsor told me a long time ago, he said, Daryl, first things first, and the rest will be added on. So number one is make sure that I'm right. And it's exactly what you were talking about, Charles. Make sure I'm right for myself so that I can be right for the world. You know, that relationship that you got out of and feeling so good that you hadn't accumulated wreckage. You know, you hadn't accumulated things that you needed to make amends for or feel guilty about, or, you know, like being able, and that's to me, that's all part of being a useful member of society, which means being a useful member to me first.
You got it, Daryl. And what a humbling way to encapsulate what we're doing in recovery. We all tend to have pretty big egos as people in recovery, right? And we're not super used to like this idea that we're just one of many. You know, that we're just among the crowd. We either want to be the best or, you know, forget about it. We're the worst. We're terrible, and we don't even want to. We're gonna take our ball and go home, right?
Yeah.
So just to be one of many, and that's a beautiful experience to get to a place where you're a part of a true community. For us in recovery and other communities as well, but a true community.
So true. You remind me of when I've talked about and you know, in business stuff or work stuff or whatever, and people talk about leadership and being a true leader, and to me, a true leader is someone who is a worker among workers. You know, it's a person who's willing to do the same stuff, you know, and being a member of that community, and that's how we garner leadership, and that's how we garner respect, and that's how community works. So yeah, really wonderful reminders, and you know, just beautiful things that I know I'm going to take away, and you know, hopefully everyone listening to this is going to, you know, glean something that helps them, which is ultimately our purpose for doing this. I have one other question, and I just think it's, well, I shouldn't say one, I might have two. But who or what is your greatest ally in slowing or stopping the fighting?
The God of my understanding. No question about it. When I am faced with a situation where I get the instinct and impulse to want to control, and that's generally provoked by fear, I pause and I invite my higher power in, and I ask what the next right thing to do in this situation is. And
Uh,
it gives me an opportunity to do some inventory and understand if my impulse and instinct to act is based out of my desire to control because that makes me feel better, because that's me trying to satisfy a fear and act out of fear. Like, I want you to do this because I'm afraid of X. I want you to do Y because I'm afraid of Y. And so understanding that my higher power is critical in that process, because I can have an instant dialogue with my higher power no matter where I'm at. My higher power is portable. No matter where I'm at,
I
Daryl,
love it.
like God is right there, and I can ask God, God, help me understand what the next right thing to do here is. And as we discussed, a lot of times it's nothing. Go empty
I
the
love.
dishwasher and don't intervene, Charlie, right?
Yeah, well, I love the you said earlier, understanding that many things just don't require my response or my opinion, and it's so unbelievably true, and it's the things that used to one of my big fights and things that have come up with me over time is I'll I'll think something and oh, I shouldn't be thinking that. Or I'll feel something, oh, I can't, oh, I got to get away from that. And right there is the fight, right? Right there is where the friction is and the problem is. And just one of my favorite words in the English language is allow, and just allowing things to happen and allowing feelings to come and go and allowing thoughts to come and go. I don't have to latch on, right? And that's been just a huge realization for me that over the years, has become much more subtle. But it's wonderful to be able to it's oft used, but let go and let God.
100%, Daryl. And it reminds me of the phrase when we go through those mental gymnastics, we're shooting all over ourselves. And it's a practice, like much of what we're doing in recovery is a practice because we're not good at it, especially in the beginning. But to allow and honor that feeling and also maybe ask, why does this make sense? Why does this make sense? Why am I feeling this way?
Mm.
And for me, I invite my higher power, like, what is this about? Is this a fear? If it is, what am I afraid of? Okay. That makes sense that I'm afraid of this. Right? And then what do I do next? Right? What's the next right thing to do? A lot of times that's nothing, but sometimes that's showing up in love and being there for somebody rather than telling them what they need to do or fixing it for them or just being there. And I'm here for you. That's it. And I love you. And that's it. Right? So, but I can only do that if I surrender and allow the feeling to happen and then, go through a process of asking myself why that makes sense and do maybe a little bit of an inventory around it.
The rumination, right? The
100%.
the rumination and the resonance, and I liken it to just there's a knowing at some point. There's a knowing what the next right thing is, and there's a faith involved in knowing that I'll know what the next right thing is. And that's a cool place to be, because for a long, long time in my life, and not sober or sober, I didn't know that, and I didn't have that faith. And to be able to, I love I love the portable. My God is portable HP. That's just I love that. I love how that sounds. So if you were to offer advice, Charles, to people embarking upon the journey of, and we can just call it a different way of life, because addiction can show up in many forms, dysfunction can show up in many forms, whatever that may be for anyone at any given time, what would that advice be?
It's a great question. And you're right, it's a spectrum. And I venture to state that everybody has counterproductive thought and behavior patterns in their lives that they might want to address at one point or another. Sometimes they get real severe, and we can clinically call them substance use disorder, addiction, alcoholism, and sometimes not, right? So, um, honesty. Start with honesty. Be honest with yourself and a trusted individual about the true nature of that counterproductive thought and behavior pattern and how that's manifested in your life. And if I would add a second piece to that, it would be find people that have had similar experiences that have gotten better, whatever that looks like. Okay? Because you're going to find people that can relate to you, that you can share some things with that you wouldn't be able to share with other people, and there's going to be people in that community that have what you want and do what they do.
Perfect. That's absolutely how it worked for me. 100% how it worked for me. I had to find someone who became my ally at that point.
You got it.
Who was more at peace than me, who felt better than me every day, who woke up, with not feeling insecure and, I can't look anybody in the eye and I just can't, the anxiety and am I doing this right? And all that sort of stuff.
That's it.
Yeah.
Like, there's people in the rooms of recovery that felt like I felt, did what I did, thought like I thought, and they got better. And I really wanted to get better too. So I started doing what they did. They made their bed in the morning. I did that. They had a higher power. I was like, I'm going to give you one of them. Like, I want what you have.
Yeah. I looked at my sponsor and I remember, and he passed away a bit ago, but I looked in his eyes and I could see so much that for whatever reason, and I think it was, God was helping me. God was helping me see things that I heretofore was not able to see, but I was able to see that this man had some peace in his life, and I wanted it.
Bingo.
So, Charles, how do we find you out there? And you have a great podcast. Can you tell our listeners how to find you?
Yes, sir, I can. The Way Out Podcast, and that's wayoutcast.com, all one word. You can find all of our episodes on there. You can find recovery coaching services on there. Everything you'd ever want to know about the Way Out Podcast. And again, our episodes and coaching services are on there. So, and all of our social media links are there as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us and for your time and for your wisdom and for your wonderful stories. And I've enjoyed the conversation immensely and look forward to speaking with you in the not too distant future. Thank you, Charles.
Daryl, brother, thank you. It's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. I'm so excited you've got this podcast up and running and gathering momentum, and color me and the Way Out Podcast as ardent supporters of your podcasting endeavor, sir.
Thank you, Charles. I appreciate that. And I am a huge fan of yours. So we'll be talking. Thank you so much. And we'll talk soon.
Thanks, brother. Be well.
You as well.